morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. And Georgia is, by the way, the SEC champs. That's signed behind me. A good reminder of all that. Feels good to know that happened. Feels good to know that two big wins against Texas made it possible. We are not done talking about that. So much coming up on today's show. By the way, one Chol over here on the YouTube says, good morning, BA and Dog Nation. I say good morning right back to all of you, whether you're watching live, watching later on. Just really happy to have you on the show. We're going to try to make good use of your time. That means two great guests. It's Davin Bellamy today before we're done. It's Mike Griffith here coming up in just a little bit. We'll reflect on the fact that today is National Signing Day, although I don't have a ton for you on that. Obviously, it's a shadow of what the event formerly was here on this first Wednesday in February. We will, though, talk plenty about the ongoing proceedings in New Orleans for the Super Bowl and the heavy presence from Georgia players, former Georgia players there, including the guy on the other side. I think we've got some stuff from Malik Herring today that you're going to really, really love. I think you'll find this to be some of the best stuff we've had in a while. So we'll give that to you here coming up in just a little bit. Also, to kick things off, it's being described as a potentially distinct recruiting advantage for Georgia. It's a proposed new bill that could save some Georgia football players and other in-state, athletes some money on their tax bill. We'll kind of get into this and try to make it as interesting as we possibly can, because I do think there's a couple of different ramifications here as it relates to Georgia on this that are probably worth your time. So what do you say we dive into that off the top? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
In a previous life, my wife was a CPA. Now, she would say that she's still a CPA, and I guess technically she is, although she does not work in that field anymore. But I have been around her enough to be around the sort of conversations that she would have in that kind of former professional life. I've come to understand something. I find conversations about taxes to be pretty boring. Now, listen, it's a very important conversation. Obviously, people got to take care of their money, and you sort of want to know where your money's going. And when you have a tendency to sort of look at that little, thing that you're sort of paying out, you realize you got a lot of money escaping out of that paycheck each and every week. So taxes are important, but just because something is important doesn't always make it interesting. And I am well aware of, having just sort of spent some time around people who spend a lot of time around taxes, the taxes can be pretty boring. But on today's show, we need to talk about taxes here just for a moment. It's not an ad read. We need to talk about taxes here for a moment, and I am going to do my best. I'm going to try to just sort of reach deep within inside of me and sort of try to find a way to make this as interesting as possible, because if you kind of gloss over for a second, you sort of lose your train of thought as I'm speaking. Here is the overall bottom line. There is something kind of being proposed in the Georgia state legislature that has the potential of being what's being described by national media types as a distinct recruiting advantage for Georgia. Aha, do I have your attention now? You may not like the tax bill, and you may not like all the intricacies of the Georgia state legislature and things like that. There you go, if you're watching on video. How about the Gold Dome making an appearance? I like it when stories like this happen, just to be completely self-serving for a second, because it makes you sort of feel like you're doing something important. If you're talking about the events taking place underneath the Gold Dome, normally when we talk about the Gold Dome around here, we're talking about how much we hate Notre Dame. But in this particular case, we'll talk about the proceedings in the Atlanta, Georgia state capitol for our great state here. And as I said before, what's kind of being described as a distinct recruiting advantage for Georgia. Let me read to you Pete Nakos on 3. Took a break from, I guess, talking about who's transferring where. That's sort of what we normally think of Pete Nakos is doing, to report on this. The headline, Georgia bill would exempt NIL dollars from income tax. Now, most of you know this, but let's just sort of make sure everybody's on the same page. For the next couple of minutes, when the word Georgia is used, we're talking about the state and not the University of Georgia. This is a bill at the state legislature, and Nakos reports that a new Georgia State Senate bill filed on Monday would exempt NIL compensation received by college athletes from state income tax. It was introduced by Senators Brandon Beach, Greg Dolezal, Ben Watson, not the former player, Cardin Summers, and Frank Ginn. NACOS reports that the bill would create, as he describes it, a distinct recruiting advantage for Georgia universities. Now, this is the bill that's being proposed. And obviously, if you ever watched when you were a kid, this is sort of before my time, but I'm still aware of it, the old Schoolhouse Rock bill on Capitol Hill. So proposed in the Senate, you'd have to go through all of that. It'd have to be eventually, also, voted on the Senate, voted on the House, signed by the governor. So you'd have a whole legislative process you got to go through here. But the bill has been proposed. And what the bill would do is it would prevent athletes in the state of Georgia from having to pay state income tax on their NIL dollars. And the Georgia state income tax is like 5-point-something%. So this bill would say, hey, guess what? That 5-point-something% that all the other adults have to pay out of their salaries, if you're an athlete making NIL dollars in Georgia, you're not going to have to do that. This bill would exempt you from that. Now, to be completely honest, I don't know that I think this is as much of a game changer as the sort of phrasing that NACOS used described it as, distinct recruiting advantage. I'm all here for distinct recruiting advantages. I'd love nothing more than for Georgia to have one of those. And while I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, I don't quite know that it's distinct recruiting advantage necessarily because, and this sort of gets into territory that's sort of outside of our sort of, show charter. We don't typically talk about, the tax policies of our border states, but, Tennessee and Florida, they already don't have any state income tax. And those are programs that Georgia's pretty closely competing with when it comes to recruits. Texas also famously doesn't have state income tax either. So the schools that you're kind of competing with a lot in recruiting, they sort of already don't have this. But I still don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, because the Big Ten states, they all do have the state income tax. So maybe you do have a little bit of an advantage over them. And it also kind of gives you a chance to sort of own the news cycle here in February for a day or two. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. So my overall viewpoint on this is I see it as somewhat positive, but I don't necessarily see it as a game changer in and of itself. However, I want to talk more about this from a couple of different vantage points for a moment. Here is the one thing I sort of like about this conversation. It is probably a fact that there are schools out there, states out there, that are either able to or willing to spend more money on NIL than Georgia is either willing to or able to spend. In this case, I mean UGA. There are probably just big spenders out there that are spending in such a way that Georgia would have a hard time matching that. We don't believe that Georgia is the biggest spender in NIL. We think they're competitive, but we don't think they're the biggest spender. And that will probably always be true. And what I'm here to tell you is if you're a Georgia fan, I don't think that's necessarily something to be afraid of. It's a, I believe, unavoidable reality, but it's not the kind of thing that ought to make you fearful. And the reason why I feel that way is because of this. I like Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball is at least somewhat similar to college football with its payment structure in that, at least right now, this may be about to change, but at least for right now, Major League Baseball does not have a salary cap. It has some like luxury tax thresholds and things like that, and gosh knows we're not getting into that on this show. But in terms of sort of, traditional, as it's commonly defined salary cap, the way the NFL has a hard one, NBA has a somewhat soft one, Major League Baseball does not have a salary cap. And therefore, there are some teams that just spend way more than other teams. The most famous example of that right now is the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're spending crazy money. But the truth is, while the Dodgers won the World Series this year and they won the pandemic World Series in 2020, and everybody knows the pandemic championships don't count, while they won those championships, and listen, maybe they win the next 15 World Series, certainly given the way they're spending, perhaps they do, but the big spending Dodgers haven't necessarily found championships all that easy to win, even as they've been outspending their competition. And then, kind of prior to that, the New York Yankees were spending way more than anybody else for a long time, making the biggest splash free agent moves every single year. And honestly, when I was a kid growing up, 96, 98, 99, 2000. Yankees were winning all those World Series. And obviously the money they were spending was making that easier to do. But after that, they kind of went on a little bit of a drought in the 21st century where they weren't winning World Series as frequently as they once were. And all of a sudden, the big market they played in, the access to dollars that they had because of their local media deals, things like that, that wasn't necessarily enabling them to buy championships. And I'm not trying to be naive here. Having the most money is obviously a good thing, whether it's baseball or in this case, college football. But in and of itself, it doesn't guarantee championships, because what can happen is, to go back to Major League Baseball here for a moment, what can happen here is you may have more money than your competition, but if your competition has a better idea than you do, then all of a sudden they can level the playing field, if not overtake you, on the basis of a better idea. The best example of this in Major League Baseball is the old sort of Moneyball stuff from the early 2000s when, Billy Beane was doing his thing with the A's and Michael Lewis is writing the book. And, this idea that, okay, there are teams that are just going to spend way more than we spend, but we can recognize some market inefficiencies and take advantage of that, basically leveling the playing field and surpassing our competition on the basis of better ideas. Now, I don't believe Georgia is anywhere near like the Oakland A's when it comes to sort of a spending ability in college football, but there are teams that spend more money. And so while this NIL law that's been proposed here, this bill proposed by the Georgia Senators, while it probably doesn't change the game necessarily, I think it does move us in the direction that we need to be going in, which is the next great phase of NIL, the next great iteration of Georgia kind of competing in an NIL landscape is not squeezing and trying to get more blood out of a stone and find a way to get more dollars. You should do that kind of stuff. But eventually that well just sort of runs dry, to mix metaphors. Eventually you've just gotten all the money you're going to be able to get. But the next thing is, who has a better idea? Who has like the college football version of a Moneyball or some other kind of idea? Who is creative in finding a way to make our dollars go a little further? And honestly, bills like this, even if it doesn't become a law, are at least an example of looking at the NIL money we have available to us. What is a way to make that money a little more attractive to the players who might choose that compensation in exchange for coming to Georgia? I do like this is because I think it's kind of moving us in the direction the NIL conversation needs to go of how do you get better NIL ideas? It'd be great to have an unlimited supply of money. I don't know that anybody, Texas included, necessarily has that. But if you don't have an unlimited supply of money, there is no cap on your sort of, I guess, intuition or ingenuity is what I'm looking for. Your ingenuity when it comes to crafting clever ideas. And this, I think, is a step in that direction. Now, one more thing on this that I sort of like about it. In addition to sort of wanting the best for Georgia and making Georgia as successful as I can make it, and enjoy the success that it has. In addition to that, I also want college football to still keep feeling like college football, apart from just UGA, the sport in general. And anything that we can do that's kind of clever and makes the current compensation model a little more attractive, and frankly, keeps the agents at bay. I don't trust very many of them. Keeps the private equity firms at bay. I don't trust very many of them. The sort of short-term stakeholders that are kind of coming to college athletics in the hopes, almost like a prospector in the old California gold rush, here to make some money, and if they don't find what they're looking for, they'll just sort of move on and just leave everything trashed or whatever else. I want to keep those people out of college athletics as much as we possibly can, and I do think that bills like this give us a way to kind of creatively, perhaps, make the current compensation model a little more attractive. And with this in mind, I want to play you one clip here for a moment. And this is sort of off the subject at least a little bit, but I found this to be interesting, and it kind of ties into what we're talking about here right now. Cooper Manning, the father of Arch Manning, obviously the Super Bowl this week is in New Orleans. Cooper Manning lives in New Orleans, so he's kind of making the rounds. He was on the Dan Patrick show. You know Dan Patrick. And Patrick was sort of talking to him about kind of being the dad of the sort of next big thing in college football. And honestly, what I was just saying about how, hey, if you can find a way to kind of like reduce the tax bill or kind of make college athletes as they are a little happier, then maybe we can avoid what I believe are sort of like problematic futures for the sport. You got to be employees, and now you got these agents, and these agents are, frankly, in some cases, I believe unscrupulous. I mean, you talk about, taking 20% from their clients, things like that. I don't love that. The private equity firms who come in and want to kind of, sort of take these teams over and run them solely as businesses. I still think there is some value for college football feeling like college football. And I thought that Cooper Manning, the father of Arch Manning, this week on the Dan Patrick Show, I thought he sort of spoke to that pretty well when kind of asked about sort of what he's learned as he's gone through all of this with his son, Arch, who's about to be even more famous than he already is. Take a listen to Cooper Manning here for a moment.
I think the best advice I can give is to look at the school and where you're going to go and where you're going to be happy. I mean, if money is dictating where you're going to go for the next 4 years, you're probably going to make a mistake. And, where are you going to be? I always tell Arch, where are you going to be on Sunday nights when you've thrown 3 interceptions, you've gotten beat by the crosstown rivalry, your girlfriend broke up with you, you got 2 tests you haven't studied for, it's cloudy, and you're homesick? Where are you still going to be relatively happy? And if you can figure that out, you made the right choice. But I wouldn't let a short-term dollar amount dictate a career.
So I'm going to try to sum all this up kind of succinctly, if possible, and as quickly as I possibly can. For the cynically minded among us, their alarm bells start going off when Arch Manning's dad's talking about, my son's got a test and his girlfriend's mad at him and he's homesick. That's sort of like, I don't know, sort of quaint homespun version of college football doesn't feel very real to people anymore. And I guess in some respects it's probably not. But keep in mind, the Manning family, still among the most marketable football families in the entire world, despite the fact that both Peyton and Eli haven't played in quite some time. If they're still trying to sell the kind of quaint homespun version of college football, that means they see some value in it, which means there probably is some value to it, which means that perhaps we ought to protect that version of college football, even if that version of college football isn't quite completely genuine. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So that's another reason why I kind of like laws proposed like this of, hey, maybe we can take care of players in the current landscape the way that it is now without having to go full-blown private equity. Everybody's got an agent. Now we got collective bargaining. Now we're just like the NFL. Frankly, there is still a large portion of the population that sort of thinks that's kind of gross. And anything we can do to prevent that, I think, is probably a pretty good thing, including stuff in the state legislature about tax breaks to players, and it's kind of sort of outside the boundaries we normally discuss, that is. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, even if, and unto itself, this particular bill isn't necessarily a game changer. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are glad you are with us no matter how you get to us today. Video, 10 a.m., all platforms. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We post the show there every day. That's always kind of a nice thing. We're just glad to have you here. So thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management, who will help it make it all possible for you, too. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. We were just talking before about how, hey, the next great thing when it comes to NIL, we think is sort of good ideas. And I think one of the best ideas for you right now is, if you want the best for Georgia, support those companies that are supporting Georgia. And obviously, Breda Pest Management is one of those, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. So you get some sort of, I think, prestige associated with that. Hey, I'm working with a company that Georgia works with. That's kind of a nice thing. But they're also going to do something good for you, too, which is put more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. You may be working with a termite company right now, for instance, that cost of service is always going up. It seems like the quality of service is always going down. What Breda Pest Management, that's not going to be the case. They are going to give you the level of service which they're legendary for, and they're also going to put more money back in your pocket just for making the switch to them. So I want you to find them online. It's BredaPest.com. BREDA, BredaPest.com for more on that today. Great to have Breda Pest Management as a part of DawgNation Daily, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. All right, we got Davin Bellamy later on. It's Mike Griffith here in a couple of minutes. Mike also wrote a story at DawgNation.com about the proposed NIL bill and how it might benefit UGA and I guess the other in-state institutions. We'll do a little bit more of that with Mike here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. Presented today by Georgia Farm Bureau. And, of course, Georgia Farm Bureau loves homegrown talent. And one of those guys is Malik Herring, the former defensive lineman at Georgia, a part of the 2017 class at UGA, who has now gone on to have pretty long career, by NFL standards anyway, with the Kansas City Chiefs. And we told you yesterday that our Cody Chavins, and I thought we're going to do a lot more of this week. I thought that Cody just did a great job in New Orleans for Super Bowl opening night. Very, very entertaining with kind of took some props with him and kind of sort of got the players talking about, based on what they were seeing and just all really well done, I thought. And listen, I am like so many of you in that, man, I'm really emotionally connected to this Philadelphia Eagles team because so many of the Eagles players were not just former Georgia players, but they were former Georgia players during the best era ever for Georgia football, at least thus far, 2021, 2022 national champs. And so many of those guys from that defense are now a part of the Philadelphia Eagles defense. It's almost like it's an involuntary reflex just to cheer for them against the Chiefs because of the large Georgia presence there and also because, as has been noted, a little bit of fatigue with the fact that the Chiefs have been there so much. And I don't know. It seems to be a lot of lucky breaks along the way that have enabled the Chiefs to be able to do that. So because of that prevailing storyline, you sort of forget that the Eagles are not the only team in this game that has a Georgia presence. Malik Herring also plays for the Kansas City Chiefs. McCole Hardman there too. But, in the case of Herring, it's almost like he sort of gets forgotten a little bit because he's probably less notable than some of the Eagles players I just mentioned. His time at Georgia was a little longer ago. But gosh, to be able to have the career that he's been able to have, I'm talking about just staying in the league as long as he's been able to do so. I think that's pretty commendable. And this week, our Cody Chavins caught up with Malik in New Orleans just prior to the game on, being a part of just a remarkable run in Kansas City, and also the fact that a lot of Georgia fans sort of have some love for Philly here right now. Here's Malik Herring with our Cody Chavins.
Every year, just kind of feel more of a blessing how much it is, just because it's so rare, but yet it feels so normal. But you just kind of just look back and just at the smaller things, just be thankful for everything and the hard work you put in. You should still want to just come finish the job, even though it's such a big deal. But we do it so regularly. Right. It's amazing, honestly, bro.
So, for all the Georgia fans, all the talk is about these Philly dogs. What's your message to dog fans about, hey, man, there's some people on the other side, too?
It's all right. They forgot about us, but, we just going to see who had the last laugh on Sunday night.
I tell you, I love it. And, listen, I'll be rooting for Philadelphia, but goodness knows I'll be rooting for Malik Herring to get in and have a moment and get in and get involved there. And, listen, for us, football is a pastime. It's something we enjoy as a kind of a hobby, entertainment. But for Malik Herring, it's a profession. And to his credit, he's found a way to make a living playing football now for a good number of years. And honestly, he deserves a pat on the back for that. Now, guys like Malik will always have a special place in my heart. I was saying this morning. I was doing a radio interview with our friends at 960 The Ref. And, today's National Signing Day. We sort of forget that. But years ago, the February National Signing Day was the date. That's when signing day was. And the last year in which was sort of only a February signing day was 2017. Probably, with all due respect to others, maybe my favorite signing class for Georgia of all, just because of the transformational nature of that class and what it did to kind of build the foundation upon which eventually 2 national championships would be built for Georgia. And one of the great moments in the lead up to that 2017 class, to be self-serving here for a moment, was the fact that DawgNation put together what we called a Christmas commitment video at Jake Fromm's house. You had Jake Fromm and Richard LeCounte, who were then Georgia commits, kind of dressed up like Santa Claus. You had Jeremiah J.J. Holloman. You had Malik Herring. You had these guys getting ready to make their kind of commitment to Georgia. It was so well done, really entertaining. And there was a moment in the video where, Richard LeCounte was talking about. In fact, let me let you hear this because, this is where sort of like a lot of the Gator hater stuff for us began, an era in which a win against Florida was the sort of thing you aspired to and strive to do, so much so that way back in this class of 2017 commitment video, the notion of beating Florida was a big enough deal to even be mentioned in that video. Let me let you hear Richard LeCounte, kind of a fun blast from the past, going back to our Christmas commitments way back in 2017.
Hey, Richie, when do you think we need to let Malik and Jeremiah know what we did?
Probably sophomore year in Jacksonville. After we beat Florida again.
I mean, that was such an awesome line, it's the final line of that particular video. And I remember at the time, boy, just jumping around and happy, so cheering about that. And guess what? They did go on to beat Florida 2 years in a row, like they said, and then many, many years since then as well. But all of that kind of essentially predicted by that Christmas commitments video. The point is that earlier this week, Malik Herring, who was a part of that, he made his commitment to Georgia during that Christmas commitments video, and also showed you the nice back tuck there, in his athleticism in doing all of that. Well, he kind of talked about his own memories of that video and what Richard LeCounte had said. And honestly, I just think this is fun stuff to go back and reminisce on. Once again, Malik Herring, exclusive to DawgNation earlier this week. Take a listen to this.
Man, bro, that video, bro, was a Tuesday night in December. And Jeremiah came from Noonan. Richard came from Riceboro. I came from Forsyth. We all met at Jake House that night, middle of the week. And we did all that in one, we left at 1 a.m., bro. I was so sleepy going back home. But, man, JJ, Rich, it was just a...
Richard dressed up like Santa Claus.
But, yes, and then the thing about it, at the end, the part we were we're going to beat Florida again, our sophomore year, and we actually did it. We actually, reflected on that, too. So, that video is just deep, man. It's just a relationship, man. That's how we all started at Bond for the 6-17 class.
I love that so much. The fact that even to this day, Herring still got a lot of pride about the fact that, we said we're going to beat Florida 2 years in a row, and we did. And he said that we would reflect back on that and what that meant. Like, how great is that? I just love that so much. I also love the fact that, as I mentioned, 2017 class, one of my all-time favorite classes at Georgia. According to Herring, those guys, the famous sort of text thread they would have had with each other in communicating along the way to coming to UGA, he says that text thread's still very active. Let me let you hear Malik Herring one more time.
Everybody keep in touch with everybody. We still got our 6-17 group chat. Then we got a new group chat with the old guys and kind of the mixture of the young guys. So it's all like the love and family is still there, and it's definitely there at Georgia, and everybody still look after each other and take care of each other.
I'm telling you, man, I just love that so much. I don't like it. I love it. I love the fact they're still in contact. I love the fact that they're proud of what they accomplished at Georgia. I do believe guys like that, while they came close to winning a national championship, I think the success they brought to Georgia made the future national championships possible. I truly do. They mean a lot to a lot of Georgia fans. The fact they still mean a lot to each other, man, that's just really cool for me. Great stuff from Cody Chaffins. We've got all kinds of stuff from Cody's trip to New Orleans on our Instagram account, on our YouTube. We'll have more of that here on DawgNation Daily tonight before the hedges. Jeff Sintel, who's kind of the, de facto executive producer of that commitment video. They got more stories tonight with Kaylee Manziel and Jeff on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. I hope you'll check that out. That's going to be fun. So just a great week as we celebrate a lot of these dogs getting ready to play in the Super Bowl. And that's around the Doghouse. It's presented today by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. And I said before, Malik Herring from Forsyth, Georgia, Richard LeCounte from Riceboro, Jake Fromm from Warner Robins, J.J. Holloman from the great state of Georgia. Our folks at Georgia Farm Bureau love stuff that's Georgia grown, whether it be the food that we eat, the football players in our state. Georgia Farm Bureau is proud of it all because they're always the home team. That's why if you're making a decision about who to work with from an auto insurance standpoint or a home insurance standpoint, life insurance, all of these things, farm protection, things like that, it's great to work with a company that's here in Georgia. Georgians living and going to work and going to church, all this stuff in the great state of Georgia, just like you are. That's why when it's time to have a conversation about your insurance needs, the folks to talk to are our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau. Please give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That's GFB insurance.com. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team, and it's always great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse. All right, it is Davin Bellamy. Speaking of Georgia grown, Davin Bellamy, before we're done today, we'll talk about Davin's relationship with Malik and kind of how proud he is to see a guy like that kind of moving on and getting a chance to make a living in the NFL, and some Super Bowl thoughts from Davin, too. All of that coming up. But for now, Mike Griffith talking about the NIL stuff, the tax law stuff, things like that. Well, let's cover all that ground and more here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So to Mike Griffith. Mike wrote at DawgNation.com about the proposed state Senate bill, something we don't typically talk about a lot here on our show. We'll save that for the other programs. Our typical, boundaries are with the game of football, but this obviously has an impact on that. Mike, one of the things I said before you joined us is that, removing the state tax from the NIL payments to players, I don't think this in and of itself is a game changer, but I also don't think it's necessarily a bad thing either. What's your perspective on the fact that, in-state athletes, including Georgia football players, might get a little savings on their tax bill if this proposed Senate bill goes on to become a law?
Well, Brandon, I think it's all about competitive balance. And when you look at some of Georgia's rivals and emerging rivals, they don't have state income tax in Texas or Tennessee or Florida.
Yeah.
And those are obviously schools that the Georgia Bulldogs go head-to-head with. Obviously, Georgia Tech, Georgia Southern, Kennesaw State, all the other Georgia schools would be included in this bill. But I think more than anything, what it does is level the playing field and keep Georgia competitive, because the state of Georgia does have one of the higher state income taxes, certainly in the Southeast. I think only South Carolina is higher. Among all the SEC states, it's even higher than it is in Ohio or Indiana, where Ohio State, Notre Dame are at. It may seem like a little thing, but when you're talking about paying players $500,000, you do 5% of that and it can add up pretty quickly.
And listen to them, maybe those will get people thinking about what their state income taxes should actually be, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad conversation either, but a different topic for a different day. Look, as I said earlier, to me, what's moving in the right direction about all of this is that at a certain point, it's got to be about having better ideas with NIL. Because the truth is like in any sport, any situation, there's almost always going to be somebody spending the most, and the law of large numbers suggests it's probably not going to be you. So what you do to kind of close the gap on that kind of comes down to your ingenuity, your creativity, and things like that. And honestly, I think laws like this, proposed laws like this, are perhaps a little bit of a step in that direction of, okay, well, we may not have as much money as so-and-so, the same way Major League Baseball teams don't have the same amount of money as the Los Angeles Dodgers. But what can we do to be more competitive? How can we take advantage of market inefficiencies and things like that? And honestly, around Georgia, I do believe that's where the conversation's got to try to move to here of what can we do that's just simply smarter than what our competition might be doing.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, you need to win, because the win's what keep the people in the seats when it comes to the sales of the Georgia items, when it comes to the donations. And that's why this NIL deal is so important, because to get the elite players, and, well, we did see Georgia lose a player to the state of Texas in this last recruiting cycle that was very, very talented, that Georgia thought they had. You'd hate to think it came down to the state sales tax. But you never know. You compound that over a 4-year career, and it can add up pretty quickly when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars being taxed. So I think first and foremost, you got to win. I look at the Green Bay Packers, and they're not in a big market, certainly a big media market, but they win and they have a tradition of success, and the community continues to buy in, and in fact have actually bought stock in the Green Bay Packers. I don't think Georgia's going to be selling stock anytime soon in their football program. But there are a lot of incentives and ways that I think Georgia could raise money. More access to the players and Kirby Smart. I don't remember the last autograph day. I guess it was a few years ago. Maybe you charge for that. Maybe, now that you're paying these players, you say, hey, why don't you stick around an extra hour since you're making, or extra 2 hours since you're making all this NIL money. Stay a couple hours after practice and sign autographs. And, we're going to charge fans, $10 to get in. And, we're going to raise some money that way, or maybe we're going to open up a scrimmage and charge admission. There's a lot of different ways, that you could go about raising money that goes above and beyond just asking for the handouts.
You mentioned the Green Bay Packers. What's interesting about a team like the Packers is their success. I'm talking about over the course of my lifetime and even before I was born. Their success is only possible because of the organizational structure of the NFL. NFL is structured far differently than Major League Baseball is, where there is revenue sharing. For instance, and this gets to be boring for people, but there is revenue sharing in the NFL. There is sort of equal split of the TV dollars that come in, so much so that it's essentially almost 32 equally valued franchises. Not quite. There's still heritage around the Cowboys and things like that. But, I mean, Green Bay is not even a city. It's a small town. If the NFL wasn't structured the way that it was, the Green Bay Packers would not be able to have the success they've had. And it's important to know that right now, college football doesn't have any of that. Now, the truth is, if they do more to level the playing field, that's going to hurt Georgia more than that's going to help it, because Georgia has a decided advantage over almost everybody else. But it is interesting that one of the things that's allowed the NFL to thrive is the fact that there are protections in place to keep the Jacksonvilles, the Green Bays, the Nashvilles, the whatever else relatively equal to their competition. And in college football right now, we don't have any of that.
No, not beyond the television contract payout that I guess keeps Vanderbilt going. But to your point, they do split some of the revenue from the teams that make the playoffs. But they don't split it equally. And when you win that championship, you get that $20 million. I know Notre Dame is going to benefit a great deal from that as a private school. But you're right. Beyond the SEC television package and I don't know what it is, $60 million every school gets, these schools are kind of on their own. And there is a big difference, between the top of the SEC and the bottom. Again, Vanderbilt's a private institution, so they don't have to reveal their funds. But Mississippi State, for example, you'll see them tens of millions of dollars behind the University of Georgia when it comes to their athletic department revenue. I thought Kirby Smart made a really good point about this when he talked about how much revenue football generates and how that revenue is really more important than ever, not just to pay the players, but to fund the other sports. And as I look at Georgia starting to emerge, baseball now we're seeing a top 10, top 15 team. Basketball, square on the NCAA tournament bubble. They got some guys they paid for and beat Bruce Pearl out for, as he told us before. Asa Newell could have gone anywhere. So as you see these other Georgia programs try to grow, they're going to need NIL dollars too. And there's some spillover from football that gets directed there, as well as some money that goes back into the university. And finally, all you got to do is look at the Georgia admissions rate and how many kids are applying these days. And Alabama experienced the same phenomena. When you've got a dynamic program like this, there's kids that want to come from out of state just to go to an SEC school so they can go to those games and be a part of those SEC tailgates and the culture that we have in the Southeastern Conference, particularly at Georgia. So there's a lot to football success. There's a lot of reasons to understand why you want to keep this tax money maybe in the pockets of the players so you can get better players, continue to win, continue to attract students as well as student athletes.
So apart from the Georgia part of this, I played a clip a little earlier of Cooper Manning, Arch Manning's father, obviously Super Bowl in New Orleans this week. So Manning's been kind of making the rounds there. And, it's a clip to Dan Patrick where he's talking about, hey, you got to go somewhere where if your girlfriend breaks up with you, if you got 2 tests, it's all this sort of very quaint homespun version of college football that I don't think people think is real anymore. But I do think that people still like the idea of it. And I think it's important to kind of in this conversation of, listen, if there are NIL bills that kind of make the current model a little bit more palatable players, we ought to do it, because I think the people like the idea of college football still feeling like college football. And the more this becomes, no matter how much money's involved, because college athletics had a lot of money involved with it for quite some time, the more this becomes just a completely, I guess, no disguising how much of a cutthroat business it is. I do think there's a large portion of the public that just sort of likes that less, and the fact that the Manning family continues to give lip service to the old idea of what college athletics has been sort of, treated as by the public. I think that sort of shows how true that is, that no matter how much of a business this actually is, people still like the idea of college athletics as they've kind of considered it to be in the past.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All you got to do is look around the stadiums every Saturday and you see 100,000 seat stadiums filled up and, people giving money back to the university. And as we've seen with Georgia, the way they continue to support the players, into the NFL. You know, the Philly Dogs, you know, everybody be tuned into them, but they're all aware of Malik Herring and McCole Hardman are on the Chiefs as well. So to your point, it is a big part of the culture down here. It goes beyond just rooting for the players. You know, the people in the community like to go there and tailgate. You know, I had a chance to talk with Claude Felton recently, and, you know, he's recently retired. And he said, you know, he was always there 3 hours before the game and 3 hours after. And the thing that just blew him away upon, you know, actually getting to the game right around the time it started was how many people were outside the stadium. They didn't even go to the game. They were just there to tailgate, soak in the environment, and, you know, and catch you on the post-game show or the pre-game show on their phones or their televisions, whether they streamed it live there. So it's not just a matter of the game, it's the event, and it's a part of the culture in the South. And, you know, that's why I think this bill will go through. I think people in Georgia want the Georgia Bulldogs to have a competitive program and to be on a level playing field with some of those other states like Tennessee, like Texas, and like Florida that don't have state income tax. It's one more thing, you know, when Kirby's sitting down with the player and they ask about how much money and how much comes out of my pocket, because those conversations take place now, he can say, oh yeah, we're on a level with those schools. Don't let that be a determining factor. Look at the education you can get at Georgia. Look at the number of players we're putting into the NFL, and look at the Georgia brand. What is it, Brandon? Is it 7 out of 8 years now that Georgia's played in the SEC championship game, I believe?
Something like that, yeah, for sure. A great tradition of success, no doubt about it. Mike, we appreciate everything you do for us. Really good story at DawgNation.com on the ramifications of the proposed bill that some are calling a distinct recruiting advantage. We'll see if that turns out to be true if the bill becomes law. Mike, thanks for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you back here again very soon on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Just a reminder, Brandon, I don't think any other program has a DawgNation Daily brand like this either. I can't think of another one that has a daily podcast. So appreciate your work. Thank you.
All right, good stuff, Mike. Thanks a lot.
All right,
let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Listen, we love our role here as DawgNation Daily, and I appreciate Mike saying that. You talk about NIL ideas. I think some of you have some intuition about this, but, you know, we now have $1 Million Eddie. At some point in time, Eddie may be kind of unveiling what the whole $1 million thing with him is and how that could maybe kind of change the game to the NIL space. We're not quite ready to talk about that right now, but who knows? One of these days, we may kind of unveil that for the world to see. We'll get Davin Bellamy here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, a couple things to make you aware of on this. Before I get into the Royal Caribbean part of this, let me remind you that ongoing right now is your chance to win your way onto the DawgNation Cruise. And I can't even believe we have a chance to do this. Mike was kind enough a moment ago to kind of brag on us and the position we have as, you know, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I think the size and the scope of our show is always so overwhelming to me, and this is a perfect example of this. The fact that Kroger would use our show as a way to give away a cruise to Utopia of the Seas as a part of our DawgNation cruise, I just think stuff like this is so much fun. I am so thankful to have the chance to tell people about this, and I'm running out of days to be able to do it. February 7th is the deadline to register for your chance to win. All you got to do is go to DawgNation.com/contests. Simply tell us your favorite memory from the 2024 season, and you could be selected at random. And if you are, you and a guest on your way to Utopia of the Seas. Let me give you an idea of this. You're going to get a hotel in Port Canaveral the night before the cruise. It's always kind of nice to stay in port the day before the cruise leaves. So we'll get you a hotel room on April the 20th, a gas card to help you get down to Port Canaveral, some onboard credit to use while on board Utopia of the Seas. That's always an awesome thing. And a stateroom for two on board Utopia of the Seas, April 21st to the 25th. Kroger giving you a chance to win. Check out DawgNation.com/contest for more on that. And speaking of Royal Caribbean, what an incredible time this is for Royal Caribbean. And honestly, if you don't win your way onto Utopia of the Seas, I don't know if we can still get you on the DawgNation cruise. You can certainly try to. Obviously, you never know. But boy, it's getting to be sort of showtime, go time on that. But I do think you should check out Utopia of the Seas at some point this year. I think it'd be a great experience for you, because one of the things I love about Utopia of the Seas is, and we're in a situation now where, like, my daughter does cheerleading and gymnastics. My son does baseball, like, literally every single day, 2 practices a day in some cases. We have such a busy family that when they were younger, we could go 7 days here and 7 days there. And obviously we love the 7-night cruises, and look forward to kind of getting back, to that, in the near future. But for now, for us, it's almost like the shorter cruises, the long weekend, the 4-night cruise, like the DawgNation cruise will be. That's almost sort of the better thing for us. And so if you love the short cruises, you'll love the fact that Royal Caribbean's got its newest cruise ships serving those short cruises. Wonder of the Seas is going to be going to Port of Miami very soon. For the 3 and 4 night sailings, Utopia of the Seas here at Port Canaveral. Just a great experience. So let Jessica Slater tell you all about that. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater at dreamvacations.com. All right, a couple of things here before we welcome in Davin Bellamy. Today is National Signing Day. Everybody knows it does not mean what it once did. And the truth is, waking up this morning, I'd almost forgotten it was National Signing Day. Not only is Georgia not really involved in this, there's not a whole lot even going on nationally. So the best that I can tell, the big news for signing day so far today is 5-star offensive lineman Ty Haywood going to Alabama, now going to Michigan. Wolverines kind of climbing the ladder here a little bit. From a Georgia perspective, here is what's maybe interesting on this from Georgia. Dawgs kind of consensus number 2 class right now, which is not a bad place to be for the class of 2025. After all the talk and everything else, Georgia kind of that number 2 class. And doing the math the best I can, I reckon they're likely to stay there by the end of the day. But obvious if a team like Michigan were to hoard the available players that are left, that could change the final rankings a bit. It does look like Texas, for the first time in the Steve Sarkisian era, is going to kind of win the recruiting championship and be the number 1 class. That's obviously, they've been certainly very close before in the Sark era, and NIL obviously aiding their efforts right now. But it looks like they're going to get their first number 1 class. Looks like Georgia's going to be number 2 unless somebody makes a big move here on this final signing day. And speaking of Texas, let me just mention this briefly here for a moment. So Texas now, the latest program to kind of talk about wanting to cancel a spring game. Sarkisian citing the long schedule that they played on the other side of the college football playoff. All of a sudden now maybe they want to give the program a break here a little bit. This obviously after Nebraska talked about this, and Matt Rule, the Nebraska coach, has suggested that going back a couple of days ago. I got some more thoughts on this. Let me do this. Let me put a pin in this for right now. Let's bring on our next guest, and then I may kind of wrap up here in a moment with a little bit more thought about kind of what I think might be going on here. Obviously, the great Davin Bellamy. He's always a lot of fun. Davin, we're so glad to have you on the show today. Your insight always so valuable to us. Let me ask you, as a guy who played in a lot of G days during your time at Georgia, you've got Nebraska saying they may do away with their spring game. You've got Texas at least suggesting they may take a pause in their spring game. And if big programs like this are doing this, you might think others would follow. Now, right now, there's no indication that Georgia ever would do this. A lot of people come to the Georgia game. It's usually a pretty, interesting TV product. It seemed to be the kind of thing that Georgia puts a lot of effort towards. But if other people are changing their spring games, and in some cases maybe even doing away with theirs, you're led to wonder, okay, well, does this put, spring games on kind of thin ice for the future? As a guy who did play in spring games, are they valuable? Is this one of those things that's just fun for the fans? Is there value to the program? And what would you think if spring games just went away?
Yeah, man. You know what, Brandon, man, we've talked about a lot, on this show of with the new way college football is, you may start to see a lot of the pro rules and tendencies start to seep into college football. And when you talk about the spring game, well, I think they're trying to do away with it because same way with the NFL tries to do away with the preseason. I mean, these coaches now are starting to think about their programs not as student athletes, but as professional teams.
Yeah.
And even that has even impacted recruiting because you're not bringing in a guy, hopefully to see how he develops and see if he has opportunity to fight for a spot. Like I was a 3-star guy and just had to come in and get it out the mud. Well, in 2025, I may not even been recruited because they're looking for guys to come in and contribute right now. That spring game, the year I played, and just before all this new rules popped up, it was kind of for the guys who, the fans didn't know about, who maybe had a good camp, and now the whole world is finna see. Well, now 9 times out of 10, if I'm giving a guy, over 6 figures to come to my school, then he knows he's going to play or he knows he's going to get on the field rather quickly, I mean, it kind of takes away the mystique of the spring game. So I just think with the new NIL rules and now that college football is pro sports, things that don't make sense or make money are going to start, just weeding out. Speaking of the NFL, we played some clips earlier of Malik Herring in New Orleans getting ready for the Super Bowl and all that. And, to me, Davin, I think it's important for guys like me to remember that football is a profession. For someone like me and for our audience, it's a source of entertainment, and it's obviously a great pastime, and we love football. I mean, it's a huge part of our American culture, of course. But for guys like you, it's what you do for a living. And for a guy like Malik Herring, who honestly was not the most well-known Georgia player during his era, which overlapped your era, obviously, too. But, gosh, this is a guy who's been with the Chiefs now for quite a lot, a long time. Doesn't have a whole lot of fanfare attached to him. But, man, this is a guy making a living playing in the NFL for what might end up being, one of the most successful dynasties in NFL history. As someone who plays the game yourself, how much can you appreciate the fact that, Malik is earning a paycheck here playing for a team that's going to go down in the history books? That's a pretty cool thing, right? Yeah, man. And, I played with Malik, his first year, and I was always a big fan, of Malik. I was kind of like his bigger, mentor that he'll, come to in the locker room and, holler at. He was just that annoying freshman that wouldn't leave me alone. But I love the guy, man. He's always been a tweener, and when I say tweener, I mean a guy that can rush from the 3-tech inside and a guy that can rush on the edge. And even though, tweeners sometimes don't put up the stats that freaks do in college, tweeners usually, and guys who can play multiple positions, usually have a long-standing career in the NFL. And when you get to the league, it's all about pass rushing. And that's one thing that guy could always do. He's always had efficient hands. I mean, just great wiggle. And always was I would say, ahead of his time when it came to the skill set of a pass rusher, things that I learned later in college, he already came in with. And I think when you find a program like the Chiefs who can use a guy on the edge and on the inside, and he knows how to win, and he's a pro because of the program he came from. And the number one rule in a locker room is just stick to the next year. Just find a way to stick to the next year. And he's doing that. And a lot of Georgia players do that because we're conditioned to be pros. So all these guys, that are having these long careers coming from the Coach Smart, era, it's something for guys like me who careers didn't pan out to see that a little bit of just a drop of this DNA was dropped in him and his football mind while he was around me, and that helped him carry out his career. But I'm a big fan of Malik. I've always been a big fan of the game, and I knew that his game would translate more to the NFL than it does with college. No, I think that's really interesting. We've talked before about you and Lorenzo Carter and Nick and Sony, the decision to return for the 2017 season. I'm curious, when you made that decision, did you know that the 2017 class, that would have been Malik's freshman year, multiple starters come out of that class? Freshman Andrew Thomas at right tackle, obviously Jake Fromm, DeAndre Swift's playing a lot at running back as in kind of a backup role, but still as a freshman, and had the sort of game sealing touchdown in the SEC championship. Did you guys know that you had those good freshmen coming in that was really going to give you probably the best roster you ever played on at Georgia? How much did that decision for y'all to return your senior year coincided with, hey, man, we got some young guys that can kind of help us here, some of these freshmen kind of good enough to start? How much of that did you know? To be honest, man, we had no idea who's coming in. Yeah. I mean, the guys that were on the team the year before, like I said, we just kept losing one-possession games and, games that came down, to the final inches. And we just knew that, the team that we had our junior year or the, year, previously, the team that were beating us weren't better than us. And we just knew that we had these same core guys just come back. The ball is going to bounce our way in year two with a little bit more focus and a little bit more discipline. Now that we have a full year up under Coach Smart and he's rewiring our brain the way it thinks, we all knew that if that same core guys came back with another summer and training camp of the Coach Smart system, that we would be successful. But, it doesn't take any away from those guys, because from the first, couple days of camp, man, I'll put my hand on the Bible and say this, man. My first day seeing DeAndre Swift run, I knew he would be, a first 2-round guy.
That's
in
great.
my opinion, he should have been the first round.
Yeah.
Running back, because he hit me with that dead leg, as a freshman, and I couldn't redirect direction. I just kept running towards the sideline.
He had that move, didn't he? He had that move, right? He still does, I guess.
Dude.
But boy, he had that move for sure. He really did.
Dude, they threw him a swing pass in 7-on-7 one day, and I'm the defensive end, and I got to take him on a wheel route. And he catches the ball, and he drops that dead leg on, and I just keep running towards the sideline. I'm like, I'm not even finna try to change direction and tear something up in practice. So, I mean, that's great group of guys, man. But, just to answer the question that you said, man, we were completely locked in, focused on, the team that we had last year, knowing we were better than the guys that beat us. And I want the same crew, along with the help, but I want the same crew to go out there the next year and, kick these boys' butts.
Yeah, I love that. That's great stuff. I want to ask you one more thing before we go. And listen, I don't mean to get in your business too much, but I do think this is interesting, because there's this proposed bill out there where they're going to tell, if it becomes a law, that, college players, their NIL payments may not have to have like state income tax, which is like a pretty decent, benefit to the players. Obviously, Georgia state income tax more than 5%, so that's pretty good. That's pretty good money. But here's what I'm curious, and you've been a professional football player, multiple leagues, NFL included. Like, how aware were you of your tax situation? Now, the truth is, my wife does a lot of that for us. I don't really depending on what kind of job you have, you get taxes taken out. In some cases, if you're doing kind of a sort of a short-term contract type work, you don't get taxes taken out of that. And if it wasn't for my wife, I'd have no idea how to pay my taxes, just being completely honest. I'm solely dependent on her for stuff like that. How aware of you were you and are you when it comes to your tax situation as a player? Does it come out of your game check? Like how, what's it like sort of dealing with those taxes as a professional football player?
Well, the first thing that I want to tell, the viewers, because this kind of reminds me of my first 3 years, man, everyone thought you're just making this money, but whatever contract you see, especially if it's in the big markets, we go to New York, we go all the teams in New York, we go all the teams in LA. Let's think about those two teams. You look at the number that the guy signed for, you automatically slice that in half.
Yeah.
If a guy signed for $100 million and that come across the bottom of your ticker, your brain should go through, he got $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
He got 55. So I didn't realize that until, I got into the NFL, how much taxes really meant something. And I was lucky my first 3 years being with the Houston Texans of no state income tax, meaning I was only missing, we were getting paid bi-weekly. So you got 2 checks on one, and I was only missing, $3,000 out of that. And then it wasn't until I went to the Bengals to where I said, okay, you got to take half my check. And then it wasn't until I played for the Chargers and the 49ers where I you're taking 50% of my check, man. So just to put an example, Javion Clowney showed me his check when I was in the practice squad, my rookie year. And he said, hey, Rook, come to my locker. And this one we still had the check stub.
Yeah.
And it was on his franchise tag year. So he was making about $17 million that year, which is about $1 million a game.
That's crazy.
And he showed me his check, man. It was $888,000. So he had got taken out, a little over, almost $130,000 in taxes every Thursday. So we see how that adds up. I mean, these guys in college, when they're getting their cake in, they're eating it too. You know what I'm saying? That's beautiful to have no state income tax.
And people don't realize this in the NFL. You don't get paid every 2 weeks. You get like 17 checks for like the whole year, right? It's like it's a literal game check. You get 17 of them every week during the season, and then from like January until September, obviously you're making a lot of money, but from January until September, there are no more checks that come in.
Man, look, this is what I realized as I got older. If you're one of those guys making $100 million, or 60, or 50 mil, this has nothing to do with you. But you're only rich when you got that helmet on.
Right.
Guys live completely different through 18 weeks than they do in the off season.
Yeah.
During the 18 weeks, you go out, you eat more fancy dinners, you have more, position going outings because, you get a check every Thursday. When the off season hits, that stops to the next season because what also a lot of guys don't know is, people don't know is when it comes to camp and OTAs, I mean, you're only getting paid $2,000 a week, and that's off of everyone. Your salary doesn't count in those. That's why a lot of those guys that are the big name guys don't like to go to those teams. They're taking a pay cut to be there with a chance of getting injured. So a lot of guys don't get all their money back to week one, man. And it's definitely something that people do not look at. They always think that bottom ticker number is the number. And I always tell people it's not the NBA, it's not the MLB. The NFL, man, those guys have to earn their money every week because if you don't play, you don't get your game check. So now we're talking about you got to go 18 weeks of playing a physical game at the highest level, but also staying as fresh as possible so you can make it on Sunday to get your game check.
Davin, it's really interesting stuff. I appreciate your willingness to share stuff like that because it's obviously a window into a world that we don't get to see. Really, really good. Thanks for your time here. Enjoy the Super Bowl this week. By the way, just real quick, you got a pick on the game. Who do you think is going to win?
I was, you never pick against Pat Mahomes, Kobe Bryant, and Michael Jordan, and Tom Brady, and I won't do it.
I think that's probably
you never pick against them.
That's a fair argument. I've certainly heard people make that case, and it makes a lot of sense. Hey, enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you soon right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
Always, Brandon. Go Dogs, baby.
Go Dogs and good stuff. Yeah, I mean, listen, you got one of the greats of all time. Obviously, a lot of Georgia fans want Philadelphia to win, and I think there's a chance they might, but you got to be careful because you are going up against the emerging GOAT at quarterback when it comes to Mahomes on that. I was going to do another thing on the spring game stuff. Let me put a pin in that. We'll save that for tomorrow because I do sort of feel like there's something going on here that's not quite being discussed at kind of like the surface level, the face value level. So we'll give you more of that tomorrow. And instead, let me give you a couple shouts out before we get ready to say goodbye. First of all, our friends at Cercheros. I love the fact that as you're driving around Georgia right now, you see more and more of these Cercheros locations starting to pop up. They got 30 locations already, and now they're growing all across the Southeast too. So if you're in Georgia, there's a very good chance that a Cercheros location may be on its way to you here very soon. And if it is, you're going to love it. And by the way, if you're getting ready for the big game this weekend, how about a catering party from Cercheros to kind of keep all the folks there at your house well fed? The fresh Mex they're famous for, they can bring it right to you. The bowls, the burritos, the quesadillas, the nachos, tacos, so much more. It's the friendly Tex-Mex they're serving every day in their restaurants. You can have that served right there at your home. 25 fresh toppings to choose. And I love the fact that, at the Cercheros locations, they do these little things that sort of make the flavor and the taste that much better. For instance, if you want your veggies grilled, they do that for you. They got all kinds of just really great ways they're making it taste great. So check out Cercheros.com for more on that. That's Surcheros, Cercheros.com for more on that. And of course, also, how about a quick shout out here, too, to our friends at Dr. Pepper. We love Dr. Pepper, DawgNation Daily, college football, Dr. Pepper. It's a pepper thing. And don't forget, that blackberry version of Dr. Pepper is out there right now. A great chance for you to enjoy that. Creative new flavor from a drink brand that just doing all kinds of great stuff. We had an awesome time with our friends at Dr. Pepper in New Orleans back during the Sugar Bowl and all the great things we've done. SEC Championship. The blackberry version of Dr. Pepper, it's here now. Great chance to enjoy that. They were a big part of our DawgNation invasions. We love our folks at Dr. Pepper, so as you're at your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your shopping, pick up some Dr. Pepper, including the brand new blackberry flavor of Dr. Pepper. Once again, Dr. Pepper, DawgNation Daily, college football. It's a pepper thing. Although away from college football for a moment, we send well wishes tonight out to the Georgia basketball team. And a reminder to all of you, if you want to support the Dogs and their tournament hopes, trying to get back to their winning ways here, it is a late one for you. So we'll give a golden shoe out to Georgia basketball. Last time we did this, it worked. They got a win. So Dogs taking on LSU tonight. LSU not one of the better teams in the SEC, but a team that has won in the SEC. So be careful here. Stegman Coliseum. It's a late one tonight. Wishing the Dogs well, and I think find a way to get himself a couple wins here this week. They will keep those tournament hopes alive. So stay up late tonight with Georgia basketball, or, I think they're offering some ticket deals because of just the late start. Hard for a lot of people to get there. So if you want a pretty good price to go watch some big-time college basketball, I'm sure there'll be room for you in Stegman Coliseum here this evening. So best of luck to the Hoops Dogs. We'll give them a golden shoe for that. Lousy, stinking Gators. There was a time not all that long ago where Richard LeCounte prophesied that Georgia would beat Florida 2 years in a row. They did that, and they have now done so much more. About 1,551 days. That is how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. You'll have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Great to have R.S. Andrews here and been with us now for a good number of years, almost as long as our winning streak against Florida has been celebrated. Actually, predates the 1,500-something days, but going back to sort of even the time in which all the stuff with LeCounte and those guys was just starting. That's kind of when our relationship with R.S. Andrews began, which is really cool. How great was that with Davin Bellamy? You know, part of the reason why I don't quite know if the NIL bill game changer necessarily is because I honestly don't think the average player knows how much they're actually paying in taxes or something they know. And, you know, if they, you know, depending on how their payments are structured, I mean, if you get the payment, the tax has already been taken from you, the 20%, you know, essential, basically usury that the agent may be charging you, you just don't really know. All you know is you got money you didn't have before, and that's probably a good enough deal. Interesting to hear Davin sort of talk about as a professional in the NFL, other professional leagues that he's played in, kind of what it feels like to kind of have that money taken from you and, you know, what all that is. I think that's pretty good stuff. Let's see what else. Henry Dion says that Brady is the GOAT. I believe that for now he is, but y'all, you got to realize something. You know, Pat Mahomes is not even 30 years old yet. He's am I right about this? He's never been in anything less than the AFC Championship game for his entire career, and obviously would be going for it. Would this be a fourth Super Bowl, including 3 in a row? Sometimes in sports things change, and you know, I'm not necessarily a big Mahomes fan or anything like that necessarily, but you know, you do try to appreciate the history that you're seeing unfold, and this would certainly be another step towards, I mean, Mahomes just being better than Brady. Gary Roach, thanks you for the kind words. I appreciate that, Gary. That's incredibly nice. Thank you very much. And it was also nice for what Mike said here today. We don't take for granted the fact that we really are, I mean, we just feel very lucky to be in a unique position. You know, doing this show, talking to Georgia fans, getting a chance to do this every day. And honestly, the fact that, you know, for us, you know, you hear a lot about this now, but when we started doing this, there weren't a lot of people saying this, that essentially football season never ends. We're just here every day. We get the chance to sort of have the conversation. And honestly, the energy level, the content, you know, it's the same. February, May, July. We're just really lucky to be able to do that. And we try not to take it for granted that we do have such an awesome platform to be able to talk to all of you on. And we try to use it wisely. And one of these days, Eddie may use it to raise $1 million. We'll see. We'll see if he's able to do that. Let's see what else. Let's see what else is going on here on YouTube. Foster Moss talking about Michigan still adding talent. Yeah, I mean, obviously Underwood's coming in at quarterback. You kind of wonder, will he be the starting quarterback next year? And you sort of wonder, you know, how much of the dip that Michigan took this past season, how much of that can be corrected for 2025. And, you know, you also kind of wonder, too, a lot of similarities between Michigan National Championship, lost a lot of that team, completely different team in 2024. How much of a possibility do you see for Ohio State? You know, both coordinators, starting quarterback, key pieces on defense. How much of a dip do you see for Ohio State for 2025, if at all? Maybe none, but you do kind of wonder about that. Jerry Dog fan also bringing up a really good point too, that very quietly, Andy Reid, the Chiefs coach, is also making a very big push towards the conversations about all-time greatest coach. Now, I do think what Belichick did still gives him an advantage over Reed. I do think that the best that I can tell, at least in what I sort of think of as the modern version of the NFL, Belichick is the best coach. I don't like Bill Belichick, but I think it's probably true. I don't love Andy Reid necessarily, but one of the reasons why I think I'm more interested in the Super Bowl than some people are is because I do believe there's a lot of really cool history on display here. And I do think the chase for a third straight Super Bowl title, something that has not been done in this league since the pre-Super Bowl era, winning 3 straight championships. I do think that's a real sensational thing to talk about. It's just a cool piece of history. And, you know, it is easy to forget that before Reid came to Kansas City when he was the Eagles coach, you know, Andy Reid was sort of thought to be an underachieving coach. Eagles got to the NFC Championship a lot, made the Super Bowl the one time, but got to the NFC Championship a lot, had a hard time getting over that hump. And, you know, Reid, as coaches sometimes took a lot of the heat for being that, you know, coach that couldn't quite get him over the hump. Well, now they've won a ton of Super Bowls, and you do have to think about Reid in a completely different hierarchy, different sort of level of coaching. He is one of the best to ever do it now, without a doubt. You're going to put him in the same category of a Walsh or a Chuck Noll, probably not a Belichick level, but okay, yeah. So he'd be ahead of. Jay tells us would be ahead of Bill Walsh, same number as Chuck Noll. So this is, you know, this is pretty close to use an overused phrase, but this is pretty close to being kind of a Mount Rushmore of NFL coaches if Reid gets his win. So it's not just Mahomes kind of chasing GOAT status as quarterback, something that I do because he's young enough, something that I do believe that Mahomes can fairly easily accomplish. He could very well be the greatest quarterback of all time when his career ends. I don't quite believe, because of Reid's age, I don't quite believe that he will ever be thought of as the best coach in the NFL, because I think his time is nearly done, although I do believe he's coming back for 2026. I'm sorry, for 2025. I do believe his time is nearly done. So he may not get the best coach status, but he's got to be on your shortest of short lists. Steve Waters checking on YouTube, normally a DawgNation.com commenter, saying, looking forward to the Super Bowl. He says, I'm a Dog fan. The wife is a Missouri fan, and so she likes the Chiefs. So really, I can't lose. He says, Mahomes wiggles around to win this year. Sorry to Jalen Hurts. So there you go. Good prediction there from Steve Waters, our good friend from down there in the Alabama Gulf Shore area. Gulf of America, I guess we call it now. How about this? Stephen Venanzi, who frequent commenter for us, says his alma mater, Towson, picked up a big signing today, a quarterback out of St. Thomas Aquinas. There you go for Towson getting a big pickup there. Towson is in Maryland, right? It's a great lacrosse school, but also known for their football too, because Stephen played there. Let me get some Facebooks for a moment. We'll see how people are doing on the Facebook side of things here. For the record, I believe my pick in the Super Bowl is the Eagles. I believe that is the Eagles. I do get, you know, Davin's argument, and others are making the same point of, listen, you're talking about a narrow point spread, and, you know, Kansas City's only been point and a half favorite. I think there's a chance by the time we get to the actual game, there's a chance that Philly maybe would be a slight favorite. We may see this one go through 0. I think Philadelphia is probably the right side here. Let's see what else. Sebastian Clerk says neither Reid nor Bill Belichick won anything without a quarterback. I'd say that's true. Obviously, the great coaches benefit from the great quarterbacks. I think that's probably true. I mean, I guess in the case of Belichick, you know, the one year they had Matt Castle, they still went 11-5. They didn't make the playoffs. They still went 11-5. But in the grand scheme of things, you know, one of the great kind of sports arguments, is it Brady or is it Belichick? It certainly seems like Brady was the clear winner there because when Brady left New England faltered. Belichick's now out of the NFL, whereas Brady went on to Tampa, won a Super Bowl, and probably could have continued to compete for more had he chosen to keep playing, even at a pretty advanced age. Marshall Fleming says he doesn't think the NIL bill will pass. It might not. He says you can't let any group of people pay taxes and others don't have to pay. I won't speak on that necessarily. I don't know about that. I'm sure there's a legal way to sort of draw that up. They would certainly, try to find some way to sort of couch that legally so it works. I don't have a strong feeling about that necessarily. Let's see what else. The one thing that we try to make clear to the show is, I'm not against it in a roundabout way. I think stuff like this is probably positive. Don't think it represents a game changer, though. But the next big idea could. What else? Gary Holt talking about, football players being put on a pedestal more so than other careers. And I do get that. And I think one of the things that, even though we don't talk about a lot of this stuff, we do believe that that there are obviously a lot of other things other than football that are incredibly important. But, nobody is capable of sort of thinking all the time about the things that matter most, right? Everybody's mind needs to wander a little bit. And football is sort of a thing for your mind to wander to. It is sort of a break. It's like you can't live always with the full-on intensity of trying to pay attention to the things that matter most. Every now and then you just sort of need to zone out for a little bit. In football, it's a great way to sort of zone out, whether it's zoning out for an hour while you listen to our show or zoning out for 4 hours in the weekend while you watch the game being played. It's just sort of nice to have an entertaining break. And, I'll be honest with you, there have been various points in my life, because I've, done sports media for a long time. There have been various points in my life where you sort of ask yourself the question of, okay, so is this an okay thing to dedicate a life to? I'm talking about me speaking about sports and football for a living. Is this an okay thing to dedicate a life to? And at one point in time, I didn't have a ton of peace about that. Like, one of the things that kind of gives me more peace about that now, and you've maybe heard me say this before, which is I don't know that talking about football is necessarily important work. But people who do important work, I'm talking about, and I hear from these folks, truck drivers and, builders and, people that are actually making society function, people that do important work use our show as a break from the important work they're doing. And some of those folks are also doctors and lawyers too. We hear about people doing important work, taking a break from that work to kind of let our show just give them a chance to rest their mind for a minute. And football in a roundabout way, kind of functions the same way. And so, I don't know that society's ever been particularly good at demonstrating the things that matter most. But I still think that football kind of serves an important function because of the break that allows us to take from those things that truly matter. That's probably just my 2 cents on that. Jonathan Moore says, good luck zoning out during a game like the Tech game was this season, which is true. When I say zone, like, here's one of the things I've learned. I can relax my body a lot easier than I can relax my mind. You get older, you sort of gain insight about yourself. In other words, I can sit and do nothing, especially if you have a drink or something like that, just sort of makes sitting and doing nothing a little easier. But even if my body stops moving, my mind does not stop moving. It's just racing around, sort of monkey mind, sort of bouncing around all over the place. And so therefore, what I have found is it's helpful to have things to think about so that you can take a break from the things that you don't want to think about. There's certain things that, just kind of give you stress or something like that. You can't stop thinking about something, so therefore find something else to think about so that you can take a break from the stuff you don't want to think about. And that's why, like, I like golf. You think about how do I get the ball in the hole? Given my abilities, which are limited, what can I do to advance the ball closer to the hole? It gives me something to think about. And that, in a way, becomes rest. We like to go amusement park or stuff like that. It's just sort of something to think about. It's like, I'm not going to truly stop thinking. So let me have something to occupy my time and occupy my attention. And that in itself becomes its sort of own form of rest. And that's sort of what football is, at least in my mind. We got a dog. Yeah, that's right. That's right. We could become a little more of a different kind of show if we had to, as Jay Black points out. Garrison Tucker says, you're darn right, B. I love having DawgNation on while I'm designing roads and bridges here in Oklahoma City. See, there you go. You talk about this. You talk about I'm always amazed at the people that listen to the show are so much smarter than I am. I couldn't design a bridge. I couldn't. It's like when you're a kid, you try to build like the block tower. I could never figure out how to keep that thing from toppling over. You don't want me building your bridges, but if I can keep somebody entertained who is building your bridges, then that's a very good thing. So that's awesome to hear, Garrison. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And that does come with a lot of pressure. That's exactly right, as Jay points out. You think Mike Bobo's under pressure. Be the guy that builds the bridge. You find out what real pressure really is. UJ Marine asking the question I was also kind of wondering about how many NFL job openings there are and how many there could be open. Because remember, we got 2 teams still playing. So you got to presume there are more coaching changes to come, which beget other changes, which makes you kind of wonder, do we still see some coaching carousel spinning in the college ranks? Sometimes, National Signing Day is not quite what it once was, but it used to be kind of a start of a second coaching carousel spinning. Is there a chance some of that's still true? I do kind of wonder that. SEM Dog asking if the Rats in Columbus know something, meaning all the departures. I really don't think that's the case. I mean, honestly, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty dramatic. Like, I think that Chip Kelly did not want to be in college anymore, and so decided to go to Ohio State as sort of a 1-year stopover as an attempt to get back to the NFL, and it worked. In a lot of ways, this is a little bit similar, not a carbon copy, but a little bit similar to the Todd Monken thing. Monken was at Georgia for 3 years, but ultimately Monken was essentially a hired gun, sort of a short-term proposition for a guy that had no interest in staying in college football any longer than he needed to. Kelly has more of a history in college football, but I think he was just done with it. So much so that he gave up a head coaching job. And at the time, that seemed really crazy. But his ultimate goal wasn't, I believe, to be Ohio State's offensive coordinator, to be an NFL offensive coordinator. Maybe he didn't think he could get one, but lo and behold, if you do a good enough job in 1 year at Ohio State, well, now you're getting $6 million to be the Raiders OC. That's outrageous. And so, Ohio State just sort of bet big on a rental, and it worked. And by the way, he wasn't their original idea. Their original idea was Bill O'Brien, who I don't think would have been anywhere near as successful. I have a hard time imagining Ohio State would have gotten the same offensive performance from a Bill O'Brien-led offense as it did from Chip Kelly. The other thing is the Jim Knowles departure. Look, Knowles and we're led to believe the longtime defensive line coach Larry Johnson, they weren't getting along. And so, this isn't so much that, they know there's a problem in Ohio and Columbus. Knowles just wants to run his defense the way that he wants to run it, and he only had a limited ability to be able to do that, we're told, there at Ohio State. So, look, there's a chance they take a dip because, Knowles was a good DC, Kelly was a good OC. I learned something. Somebody had this line, and I didn't realize this, is that in the entire college football playoff era, we haven't had a play-calling head coach win a national championship. I wish I could give credit to the person who pointed that out because I didn't know this. Obviously, the most recent play-calling head coach won a national title would have been Jimbo Fisher with Florida State in 2013. This is part of the reason why at one point in time I thought Fisher was probably a pretty good coach because as a play caller himself, he led Florida State to a national championship and one of the, at the time anyway, one of the best teams of all time. But we haven't had one of those guys since then. We may never have one again. So, coordinator is pretty important. And Ohio State's got a couple of replays. Garrison Tucker says it's harder to get into recruiting now than it used to be. I think that's true. I do. But as we said before with the Cooper Manning clip that we played, like people still value the sort of quaint notions of what college football used to be, even if what it used to be wasn't as true as we like to think it was. So the sport itself is going to kind of figure some of this kind of stuff out. It's like people have an expectation for what college football is, and by and large, a large portion of the audience does not want it to be NFL light, and they don't want every player to have an agent. They don't want private equity firms to sort of own the teams themselves. They don't want that. All right, let's see what else. Let me go back to YouTube, then we're going to get ready to bounce out of here. Keith Ritchie says, with NIL, transfer portal, free agency, we're now entering a time when not only you have a university obligation, we now have a professional football obligation as coaching staff. Yeah, I mean, it's getting to the point now where if you're the head coach, let's just say Kirby Smart, like you have to understand that like the sort of managing the organization, the money part of the organization it's somebody's job. And so if that's either a part of the job that doesn't come natural to you, then you got to either learn how to do it or give it to somebody else. And, we're hearing more about general managers in college football. I don't necessarily think that Georgia needs one of those, but I do think that Kirby, and I'm sure he probably does, needs to understand the way in which he has to sort of function as Georgia's general manager. And in the NFL, oftentimes we think of the GM as the boss of the head coach. I don't think in college the GM role is necessarily going to be the boss of the head coach in most situations. But boy, managing the money and sort of deciding who gets what, it's a big job here moving forward. It really is. Motivated, dedicated. Thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I really do mean that. Thank you. Foster Moss says, if you think about it, Philly is an all-SEC team. The majority of their key players are from the conference offense and defense. Yeah, I mean, obviously we make a lot of their pursuit of Georgia players, but they've done the same thing with a lot of Alabama guys too. Yeah, they have definitely valued the SEC. You're right about that. Let's see what else. CK3 mentioning the benefit that Bowers might get from working with Chip Kelly. I believe it's going to probably be good for Brock Bowers. I mean, we saw how Todd Monken can use Bowers. Now, Bowers had a great rookie season, but there's maybe even more that could be done with him, and I do believe he can, benefit from that. It seems like the Raiders, they've obviously been, not exactly a model NFL franchise. The Davis family has had its issues. Now it's Mark Davis, used to be Al Davis. You do get the sense that as a minority owner, Tom Brady's a little bit more in the focal point there, in the forefront. Big dollars spent on Chip Kelly, their willingness to make sure that people know they spent that money on Kelly. I think they're really trying to demonstrate their willingness to say, we just want to be a better organization. We want to be more well-run and have a little bit more of a professional face to our organization. And honestly, if the Raiders have kind of had their own sort of make peace with that moment, there's a franchise here in the state of Georgia, in Atlanta, that could maybe consider doing some of the same stuff. All right, let us see. Anything else before we go? Let me check back over here on Facebook one more time. Grady Darcy says the general manager is like the athletics director. I don't think it's the same thing. Now, like, you know, in terms of like how you sort of picture it, it's sort of picture the same thing. But the role of the modern AD is something that doesn't really exist in, like, say, the NFL or other professional sports. The AD is now a fundraiser. Like, I mean, I hate to sort of make this comparison, but like the AD would be a little bit like the chairman of the Republican or Democratic National Committee. Like, that's what the AD is. It's the person who's really good at raising money. And that's why a guy like Ross Bjork, who, you know, had his issues at Ole Miss, had his issues at Texas A&M, gets what's thought to be a really big job at Ohio State. Like, you know, coaching hirings didn't all work out great, but Bjork is thought to be a good fundraiser. That the job of athletic director is now a fundraising job. And that's why you don't see as many ex-coaches as athletic directors anymore. You see guys who are, and gals in some cases, who are good at fundraising. That's what the AD is. And yeah, you hire some coaches and you do some things like that. But the main job of the athletic director is to make the money flow in. And so the GM role for a football team is going to be a little different than that. It's going to be, honestly, you know what it might end up being? In some cases, it might end up being the bad cop. You know, you heard like good cop, bad cop. Your GM may eventually just sort of be your bad cop, where the head coach can say, hey, listen, man, I love you as a player. I want the best for you. But that guy in that office over there is crunching numbers, and he thinks you're only worth this amount of money. Like, the GM, if nothing else, may end up being the bad cop who has the problematic money conversation with one of the players. That's what that might end up being. And you may need one of those guys. Ken Holcomb mentioning the old Smith family, the owners of the Falcons. The truth is, though, I mean, for a long time, Arthur Blank, and I think that Blank certainly has done some good things in his time as Falcons owner. For a long time, he was sort of treated as the guy that put a professional face on the, old Southern owners that was the Smith family. But to this day, the greatest moment in Falcons history still happened under the Smith ownership. It was winning in Minneapolis in the NFC Championship game in the 1998 season. That's still the best moment in Falcons history. And it happened under the Smith family's watch. So I think part of the Falcons' issue is they thought the ownership group that's been in place for this century, they thought they were just sort of better as owners and more professional as owners, simply because that's what they thought they were. They were going to be the model NFL franchise without actually having the accomplishments that made them so. So I honestly think, in comparison, the Smith family gets a little bit of a bad rap. Because after all these years, Atlanta still hasn't had an individual win as impressive as winning at a 15-1 team on the road. Let's see what else. Anything else before we go? Back on YouTube one more time. MG pointing out there's also a large SEC presence there for the Kansas City Chiefs too, which I would say is probably true. All right, great stuff. Listen, y'all have a great day. Thanks for being here as a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, and as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews can do a lot of things for you. We're still in that time of year where don't let the kind of warm weather this week fool you. We did have to cut on our AC at home, but we know eventually the cold weather is going to come back, and that's why if you haven't made that decision to get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs, this is a great time to do that. It may only cost you $99. Eventually, you may need a new furnace. Let's face it, everybody does at some point. But for now, our folks at R.S. Andrews might be able to tell you how to get new life out of your old unit. So talk to them today. Get all the information that you need online, rsandrews.com. That's rsandrews.com. And we'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.